I did come to Sacramento in 1973 to work for the late John Vasconcellos. So it's always fun to be back here and see old friends and former colleagues. It's great to be here. We're going to talk at you for a little bit. I'm going to try to limit myself to 15 minutes, and then Joonho actually has most of the good news to deliver. I'm just delivering the bad news. I guess it's our generational roles. First, a little bit of vocabulary. We're going to talk about TSP students, which stands for Targeted Student Population. These are the students that are weighted under local control funding formula, so English learners, kids from poor families, kids in foster care, and homeless kids. So TSP is the acronym the LA Unified uses. We've sort of adopted that imperially, I guess. We'll talk about concentration grants. Sometimes we'll call these CGs. So as most of you know, under local control funding, every district gets a base grant of so much money, and then based upon the count of TSP kids, these low achieving or low income kids, they get a supplemental grant. And then if the district enrollment exceeds 55% of the TSP kids, they get a concentration grant. And when we go to Joonho's findings and presentation, we're going to focus on the effects of these concentration grants because we have a method for really isolating on the discrete effects of concentration grants in a way we can't do with supplemental grants. So CG stands for concentration grants. Okay, so the acronyms and vocabulary start to get hot and heavy, so that's a word of warning. Also, I say we say here $41 billion later. This is the amount of money the ledge analysts estimates has been spent on supplemental and concentration grants since 2013-14, since LCFF kicked in. So our work at Berkeley has tended to focus on how supplemental and concentration grant monies are allocated across schools, and then can we estimate effects from supplemental and concentration grants. So of course the LCFF, I'll show you a couple of figures here on spending in a minute, but supplemental and concentration grants are just one element of the increase in Prop 98 funding and outside Prop 98 funding for K-12. And we're focused just on the $41 billion that's been spent on supplemental concentration. Okay? So this is what we're going to try to cover the next 45 minutes or so. First of all, there are competing arguments over the extent to which new funding actually reaches schools that serve these youngsters, serve the weighted TSP youngsters, ELs, poor, homeless, foster care kids. There's no requirement, thanks to Brother Mike Hurst on the state board, there's no requirement that the allocation formula that drives money going to districts be extended down to schools. That is, districts don't have to turn around and use the supplemental concentration grant monies to move that to the schools serving those kids. There's no statutory, regulatory requirement, so that becomes an empirical question. Are the supplemental concentration grant dollars generated by these poor kids, do those dollars actually go back to the kids? I don't think Bill Lucia is here, but several years ago when David Plank and Susanna Loeb and several of us were trying to figure out some sort of weighted student formula with Mike Hurst, Bill Lucia had the wisdom to say, is this going to be a dump truck or a backpack? In other words, once we target money on these low achieving kids, we're just going to back our dump truck up to the back cargo door of LA Unified and just dump another $1.1 billion a year and hope that the district spends this more progressively? Or is it a backpack? That is, should the money be strapped to the back of each child and the money goes with the student? And the legislature and Mike and others decided it should be a dump truck. Okay? But we're interested in the extent to which it becomes a backpack. So does the money generated by these low achieving kids, does the money go to the schools serving those kids? That's been the guiding question in our work in LA. Quick overview of state funding. Several of you in the room know this better than we do, but I thought it might help set the context. And then for LAUSD, we focus on this distribution of budgets across different kinds of schools. Is this operating like a backpack where the money follows the schools, the kids in the schools that serve these youngsters? And then turning to Joonho's most recent work, we're going to focus on variation across school districts statewide, asking the question of whether concentration grants lead to good things. When districts get concentration grants, they're over the 55% enrollment of TSP kids, high concentrations of poverty. When that triggers concentration grants to those districts, do we see good things happening? And in short, if you want to focus on lunch, there's going to be some bad news for LAUSD, and there's some good news statewide. So that's sort of how we're organizing the talk. We don't want to give you indigestion at the end of the talk. We're going to give it to you at the beginning of the talk. Okay, so first of all, there are competing arguments here about the backpack dump truck metaphor and reality out there. One are optimistic. There are optimistic arguments that supplemental and concentration grants will move to schools serving higher concentrations of these kids, and that could happen through a couple mechanisms. One is that the LCAP process spurs local activism, and pro-equity groups push school boards to distribute money progressively, to distribute money to the schools that serve these kids. So that this local democratic process, this is sort of the Mike Hurst hypothesis, I would say, is that local activism will lead to progressive distribution of the money. The other argument, which is related, is the proportionality requirement actually is working in districts. Without going into the weeds on this, this requires that as districts get their supplemental and concentration grant bumps in school finance, they have to increase services or instructional support in proportion to the new money that's generated by these kids. And as some of you know, in LA Unified, there's an active lawsuit over whether that district accurately estimated what the proportionality increase would be. But there is an argument here that as districts meet the proportionality requirement and they set aside money for TSP kids, that it actually will be distributed to the schools serving the kids. We're going to show, not to jump ahead, but we're going to show that LA Unified has an investment fund of about $380 million a year that they claim in the budget is going to go to the schools serving the kids. The school board passed a resolution saying we're pro-equity and we're going to spend this $380 million a year to the schools serving TSP kids. But our analysis shows that holds for high schools slightly, but it doesn't hold at all for elementary schools. So there's a question over whether even the statutory requirement is leading to progressivity in some districts. The counter arguments here as to why supplemental concentration would not necessarily go to schools serving higher concentrations. There are a couple arguments here. One is that the political economies of school districts pushes against equitable distribution of dollars. By political economy, we mean, for example, the action of teacher unions that are worried about covering pension liabilities, or when unions worry about health care benefits. So as this new money comes down, as LA Unified gets another $1.1 billion each year from LCFF, there might be labor action or labor pressure on the district budget people and the school board to not allocate money progressively, but to put aside LCFF money for other kinds of things that may not even reach the classroom. And I'm not arguing those concerns are illegitimate. I'm just saying it may work against moving money in progressive ways to the schools serving the kids that generate the new funding. Fixed costs, facilities, healthcare, pension. The other thing we're discovering in LA, even though LA has a pretty sophisticated research and evaluation shop, is that they either don't have the technical capacity or they choose not to employ the capacity to look at distributional patterns. So they've been very supportive of our work and very grateful when we do the work pro bono for them. But even in a district like LA Unified, and we're very thankful for that, but even in a district with the sophistication of LA Unified, sometimes they don't actually look at these distributional questions. So how can they move money progressively to high-need schools if they're not actually doing the homework? So just briefly, some of you have seen these graphs before. This is courtesy of Brian Smith and others at the LEO. If you look at overall school spending from Prop 98 and you adjust for inflation, we hit this high mark around 99, 2000. we sort of went flat, and then post-recession, I think there was about a 18–20% decline in per pupil spending. But after adjusting for inflation, we've basically reached pre-recession levels. We did that in 2014–15, and this continues to go up. Okay, so we hit this big trough and been recovering from since then. This bears on debates around how we put money into the base grant for LCFF versus how much we put money into supplemental and concentration to reduce achievement gaps. For districts that don't feel that they're not really recovering from the recession yet, there's a big argument to put more money into the base grant. So the overall macro picture plays out in the district in terms of this base grant versus supplemental versus concentration. This is how LCFF funding has moved since 2015–16 to the proposed governor's budget 17–18. This gives you a sense of proportions here that under the proposed governor's budget of the coming year, 46% of all LCFF funding is in the base, $46 billion is in the base grant. These are not percentages but dollar figures. There's another $9.1 billion in supplemental plus concentration. So if you add up supplemental and concentration, the dollars focused on the disadvantaged kids, it's still less than a fifth of the overall LCFF spending. Okay, and if we reach a point where the legislature is trying to reauthorize LCFF, or we might have a new governor someday who's not named Brown, there might be a conversation about the distribution between base funding and supplemental and concentration, depending on how that governor views distributional issues and equity issues. Okay, so let me just jump into this. A couple typos there. We're going to look at disparities across schools. We want to look at growth in per pupil spending. This is all focused on LA Unified to start with. We want to look at the structure of budgets. We're finding that the share of school budgets going for certified teachers is starting to shift in LA Unified, and this proportionality requirement. I don't want to say too much about this. One interesting thing in LA Unified is that 82% of the kids are TSP. So when we go and meet with the district staff, there's always a bright district staffer that says, well, why do we have to worry about distribution? Because 4 in 5 of our kids are TSP. 4 in 5 are EL, low income, foster, homeless. So we could just we could take our dump truck and drive around to all the schools, just drop it randomly, and we'll still hit a lot of TSP kids. That is true, but these are just SBAC scores for the district from last year, and you see in grade 4, this is the distribution of kids not meeting standard, nearly met standard, beyond standard. And of course, even in urban districts, there's wide variability in student achievement. So it is true that a place like LA Unified does serve a lot of low-income kids and families, but it's also true that we have these enormous achievement gaps. Okay, so it's just something to keep in mind. Okay, so let me walk through these graphs. The layout of these graphs is quite simple compared to Joonho's graphics, but I do want to be clear as to what these show. So we've looked at, this is all LAUSD so far. We've looked at school-by-school budgets between 2013-14 and 2015-16. So again, Megan Riley at LA Unified, the budget director, has been incredibly transparent, and every November she gives us a call. She says, I'm just going to send you a big dump of every line item for every school in the district. And we get this huge data file. And from toilet paper to teacher salaries to facilities improvements, we get school-by-school budget data. And then Joonho disappears for about 2 years, comes back with these amazing graphics. So this is just showing, breaking down the orange bar for average elementary school, for example. Everybody can read this. The average elementary school in 2013-14 was budgeted about $7,500 per pupil. And in the first 3 years of LCFF, this increased to a little over $8,600 per pupil. The green bar are high schools, and you'll see that the high schools actually were spending less money. We might want to talk about this later on. But high schools are spending less money, about $6,400 per pupil in the first year of LCFF, and that's climbed to about $8,300 per pupil. So point number one is pretty significant increases per pupil for elementaries, middle, and high school. Now, the next thing we do is we take, for example, elementary schools, and the question is, well, across the district's elementary schools, what's the budget growth look like if we split up schools based on their TSP concentrations? Okay, so the orange bar is elementary schools with low concentrations of TSP students, which in the case of LA is under 60% of their enrollment. So again, these are working class, low income communities by and large within the district. But we split that. Middle TSP are school elementaries between 60 and 89%. High TSP schools are between 60%. Sorry, that's incorrect. It should be over 89% are high TSP elementary schools. I'm sorry, these are for middle schools. So for middle schools, you see that total budget did increase. The green bar are the high TSP schools, and they did get a little more of a bump than the low TSP middle schools. So from the standpoint of progressivity, if you're trying to get more money to the schools serving the higher concentrations of TSP, that did happen in LA Unified to some extent. And these are for high schools where we see even more progressivity. So the high TSP high schools started here with the same point as the middle TSP high schools, around $6,500 per pupil. But the high TSP high schools enjoyed the biggest increase during the first 3 years of LCFF, going to about $9,600. And I think, did I skip over elementaries? Maybe I dropped. I guess I was going to make a point in the notes that for elementaries, you didn't see the same progressivity. For elementary schools, Superintendents Dacey and Cortinas decided that he wanted every elementary school to have a librarian and an assistant principal, independent of their social class features. So for elementaries, in the first 3 years, the district has spread money evenly across all the elementaries. But for high schools, there was an application of what was called an equity formula, which has been pushed by the ACLU and by the Advancement Project and others in LA, United Way. And the equity formula did result in bigger increases in the high schools with the greatest concentrations of TSP kids. Okay? So on the one hand, you see progressivity for high schools, but almost no progressivity in terms of where the new money went for elementaries. Probably should have kept that slide in. Now, the other thing we've looked at for budgets, and this is a little complicated, but let me just walk you through it. We look at what the structure of school budgets looks like over time. And I want to look at high schools here. Basically, these horizontal bars here represent the percentage of the budget that's allocated for certified teachers. So in the first year of LCFF, the average high school in LAUSD allocated about 47% of their budget for certified teachers. This includes salaries plus fringes that are paid in through the school budgets. And that percentage in terms of the average school budget for the mean average high school, that percentage going to certified teachers has dropped to about 40% during the first 3 years of LCFF. And this is a little bit of a mystery. We're trying to figure out why this occurred. Part of this is probably because of retirements. The district was hiring more teachers, but at the low end, as more expensive teachers were retiring. And the other big ingredient, we think, is that when you look at school budgets, increases for administrators and support staff, like A to G counselors, foster care student counselors, a lot of the support staff positions radically increased in high TSP high schools in LA Unified. So the structure of staffing starts to move away from certified teachers towards support staff. And some principals tried to explain that to us in terms of it's easier to hire these support staff people. And also the long-term pension contributions are cheaper for the district. So there's incentives that are starting to bubble up here as these new monies go in, and that's altering the structure of school budgets. And then finally, I want to turn it over to Joonho quickly here, but finally we look at what's called the investment fund in LA Unified. And this is the $380 million per year that's being spent on that's allegedly being spent for TSP kids. The $380 million roughly equals the proportionality requirement required by law. So LA Unified claims that to increase services and instructional support for TSP kids, to increase that above what it was prior to LCFF, they have to spend about $380 million a year in the current fiscal year. The ACLU suit is interesting because it's saying that the district has miscalculated that by about $250, $260 million. So if there's a settlement in the coming months, the investment fund would go from about 380 to 545 or something like that. A little less than that, 520. So the investment fund is set up, and the rhetoric around it, I have to say, is pro-equity, that these funds are supposed to go to the schools serving the TSP kids. But when we actually plot this out, we find that there's very little progressivity even in the investment fund. So each dot here is an elementary school, and so each school is plotted based upon its percentage of enrollment, which is TSP, against per pupil spending from the investment fund. So if there was progressivity here, you would see these dots kind of follow in a line like this. As they had higher TSP enrollments, they'd be getting more money from the investment fund. And if you read the LAUSD budget, that's what the rhetoric claims. But when you actually look at the budget numbers, there's very little progressivity in elementary schools. But for high schools, there's more moderate progressivity. This line starts to lift up. If you try to estimate kind of the average relationship, you see that high schools that have more TSP kids proportionally have more spending per pupil from the investment fund. So one takeaway is that even if the district settles with the ACLU on this lawsuit, there's no guarantee that more money in the proportionality investment fund, there's no guarantee that that's actually going to go to the schools serving the TSP kids, unless there's some policy shift at the district level. Very briefly, this is kind of new analysis, which we have more work to do, but we are finding some good news in LA in the sense that the schools that show the fastest growth in their budgets are lowering class size on average. They're hiring more new teachers, and they tend to be lowering class size. So in these high-need high schools, that's a good thing, because class sizes are dropping in those high schools. And the other thing that's kind of interesting is that schools that show faster growth in their budgets during the first 3 years of LCFF are assigning fewer class periods to their teachers. So in a sense, we might start to argue here that there's improvement in working conditions for teachers, because now they're not working 5 or 6 periods a day, but they might be working 4 or 5 periods a day. We refer to this as our pro-CTA finding. On the other hand, this isn't such good news until the money's progressively allocated. So like we might, at the elementary level, we're lowering class sizes, but we're lowering it across the board. We're not lowering class sizes in the elementary schools that have the biggest concentration of TSP kids. So these organizational effects are wrapped up in how we try to address the distributional question. Okay, and this is all, I've been a little sketchy here because we're trying to finalize this. We do our work with United Way in LA, so this report will be out probably middle part of next month with all the gory details. So happy to email this out to people that have an interest. So that's our LA work. Maybe if you can just hold your questions. I know we're kind of talking at you. We did want to get through the statewide results too, which Joonho is going to present.
Yeah. Okay. I'm Joonho Lee, and let me deliver you good news. So we wanted to know whether providing additional funds called concentration grants has an effect on school-level organizational features and your student achievement. Then what is a concentration grant? The LCFF funding consists of the three main grants as you see in the previous slides: the base grant, a supplemental grant, and the concentration grant. So LCFF provides this with base grants based on the number of students, average daily attendance. And then LCFF adds more supplemental grants on top of the base grant based on the number of TSP students. So from now on, we'll call these students as no. And finally, on top of these base and supplemental grants, a concentration grant goes to the district with more than 55% of their students identified as a TSP. So as I will show you later in this talk, the district vary greatly in the receipt of concentration grant, but whether to get the concentration grant is solely determined by 55% of the threshold. Okay, we use the regression discontinuity design to identify the causal effect of concentration grant on outcomes of our own interest. So we took advantage of the fact that the concentration grant are assigned to the district if and only if the percentage of the TSP student in district is above the 55% threshold. So as seen in this figure, as a district proportion of the TSP students increases, so does its total funding allocation. So, but the second section of the line, this red line, shows that the funding increases once the district passes the 55% threshold and begins receiving concentration fund in addition to supplemental fund. And under local control accountability plan, LCAP, districts must set annual goal in 8 specified areas, including student achievement, student engagement, and school climates, and parent involvement like that. So these boxes identify how districts are to measure the success in each of the specified area. For example, for the student achievement, the district have to report, for example, in the performance on the standardized test, and the share of the ELs that become English proficient, and share of the students that pass advanced placement exams with 3 or higher. And for student engagement, the district have to report the student attendance rate, chronic absenteeism rate, and the middle school dropout rates, and something like that. So these data are available in LCFF state priority snapshot dataset, and which is downloadable from the CD website. So you may want to use that CD the LCFF snapshot, LCFF state priority snapshot data to produce your own research result. So let's first look at the distribution on district with unduplicated counts of the TSP students statewide. So this is a very important measure because the supplemental and the concentration grant amounts are calculated based on the percentage of the unduplicated pupil. So unduplicated counts means that each pupil is counted only once, even if the pupil meet more than one of the criteria among the 3: EL, English learners, and foster youth and low income, right? So
this, just to be clear on this, so this axis here, so these bars are districts. Now we're shifting statewide and between district differences.
Yeah.
And this axis here is the percentage of pupils, unduplicated counts of pupils that are so-called TSP kids. And this axis is the count of districts. So we've got a few districts here, maybe 18 districts statewide that have very low unduplicated counts. And as we go on this axis, we see more and more districts that have larger concentrations of TSP kids, and therefore they're generating more supplemental and concentration grants.
Yeah, we have a total 950 school districts in California. So we see that many of the school districts have a very high proportion of the TSP student. And this graph shows the share of dollars coming from each funding components like base, supplemental, and concentration grant among the state's largest 20 school districts. So LAUSD is left out in this plot because the amount of the LAUSD funding is fairly large, and so it is out of scale. But the TSP percentage of TSP student in LAUSD is 82%, so they are receiving a substantial amount of a concentration grant as well as supplemental grant. So as can be seen in this graph, the largest share of the dollar is coming from base grant, and the share of the dollars coming from the concentration grant is fairly small compared to base grant. So even in some school districts which have less than 55% of TSP percentage, and they are not actually getting concentration grant. Concentration grant is represented as a green bar here. For example, the Poway Unified is not getting any concentration grant, right? And also San Juan Unified is not getting any concentration grant. It's also the case where the Clovis Unified and Capistrano Unified. And we can see that because the supplemental grant is perfectly predicted by the unduplicated pupil count, the number of TSP students, we can see that the school district, unified district, which is not getting a concentration grant, is also not getting very small portion of the supplemental grant, which is represented as blue bar here, right?
Joonho's about to report on the effects of the concentration grants, okay? Because we have this nice break at 55%, which emulates a natural experiment. Many districts don't get concentration, you hit 55%. Now you do get a dose of concentration. But the limitation of this is that the share of total budgets coming from concentrations is fairly small, except for large urban districts. Okay? So we're looking at just the concentration grant piece, setting aside the effects of supplemental grants for the moment.
Yeah. So when comparing the concentration grant allocation to supplemental grant, while concentration grant is determined by the percentage of the TSP student, supplemental grant is linearly driven by the count of the TSP student within district. This is a difference. But CZ, concentration grant funding kicks in when TSP enrollment, TSP percentage exceeds 55%, and then varies widely based on student TSP count among districts. So here, the key features of the regression discontinuity design we make use of in our analysis is that the assignment variable, here unduplicated pupil percentage, is uniquely defines treatment assignment. See, because of the fact that the assignment variable is fully known, the selection process is also fully known. So we can control for that selection process, selection effect on our estimation of the causal effect. Okay. So we then test whether districts over the 55% cut point receiving concentration grant display stronger social organization feature for high school and lead to improve student achievement in elementary and middle school.
Joonho, can I interrupt just for a moment?
Yep.
I'm sure everyone in the room understands regression discontinuity designs better than I do, but for my own purposes, I'm just going to explain it a little bit more, which is that the problem with regression analysis generally is that you have to control for lots of variables, right? And that there's always an argument that one school is different from another school. With regression discontinuity design, you need a variable that has a specific explicit cut point. For example, that if you have 54% of students who are not TSP, you're not eligible for concentration grants. If you have 56%, you can receive concentration grants. Okay, and so the argument, the reason why we use regression discontinuity designs is that we assume that schools on either side of that boundary are similar in every other respect, right? That they have lots of poor kids, but they don't have as many poor kids as would allow them to receive the grant. So the discontinuity separates schools that are otherwise very like one another on one arbitrary variable and allows us to say that if we see differences between a school at 54% and a school at 56%, it's because they fell on opposite sides of the boundary, because of the policy intervention. Okay, so I think it just it's and those of you who are veterans of PACE seminars have seen other people use these designs, but it's important to recognize that this is a sort of statistical trick, right, to separate schools that otherwise look alike based on a specific policy intervention. So that's what's going on with these analyses.
Yeah. So just as David's saying, these districts here are getting no concentration grants because they're below 55%. Once you cross the bar, you get concentration grants. The treatment kicks in, the experimental treatment kicks in. And as David also said, districts that are at 54 and 56 look really a lot alike. In a sense, it's almost randomly assigning a district between under 55 versus over 55. In that sense, we emulate this natural experiment. It is a natural experiment.
Yeah, now I don't need to explain, 2 or 3 slides I prepared. So thank you, David. Thank you, Bruce. Okay, here. So well, our outcome variable of main interest is social organization features for high school and the student achievement in elementary and middle school. So for social organization feature, we chose 2 measures: percentage of the courses meeting A to Z guidelines, and the second one is the number of class periods assigned to teachers on average, which imply teachers' working condition, right? So for the student achievement, we chose percentage of the high school pupil scoring 3 or higher on AP exam. This appears in our state priority list, right, in the previous slides. And we also looked at whether our concentration grant affect the percentage of the pupil grades 3 through 8 failed to meet the ELA or math standard, which means the percentage of the low-performing student within district. And then we also interested in the percentage of the high-performing student. So we used the measure the percentage of pupil grade 3 to 8 exceeding ELA or math standards. So I prepared this slide, but you already fully understand how it goes, right? So let me just briefly review this plot. So x-axis represent TSP, percentage of the TSP student. So we call this as assignment variable because this variable assigns the treatment condition, right? Just above the 55% cut point, these each dots represent the school district. So these districts are actually getting concentration grant. So they are treatment group, right? Right-hand side of the cut point. But just from the below the 50% cut point, these school districts are not getting a concentration grant. So we say that they are control group, right? But it is not fair to compare, this school with this school, or just comparing the mean between this whole control group and the whole treatment group, because there might be a systematical difference in these 2 groups in terms of school climate, kind of unobserved variables, right? So the basic idea is just focusing on the school districts around this cut point. This resembles a randomized experiment because these 2 schools in this area around the cut point, these school districts are very similar, right? In observed characteristics like school climate, right? But we impose a very arbitrary cut point, and even though they are very similar, some school districts are assigned to the control group, but some school districts are assigned to treatment group. So this resembles a randomized experiment, right? So we call this as quasi-experiment. Any question on the basic logic of
What's on the x-axis, the y-axis?
a y-axis is a percentage of the middle and elementary school students who fail to meet the ELA standard, okay? Which means percentage of the low-performing student, right? So here we can see some circular trends summarizing the relationship between a percentage of the TSP student and the percentage of the low-performing student, right? So we can see that as a percentage of the TSP student increases, the percentage of the low-performing student increases. This is very, nature, right? So if we observe some, discrete jump in the cut point, it implies that there's something going on. But not because of some unobserved, variable, unobserved characteristics of the school district, but solely by this, cut point, this arbitrary cut point.
If there was no effect, we would see this curve without any discontinuity. So as districts had higher concentrations of TSP, the share of kids not meeting the standard is just directly related. As you go out on this x-axis, you're going up on this y-axis. But the fact that there's this bump down is encouraging, and the bump down occurs right where they got the concentration grades.
Yeah.
But the amount of money that you actually get at 56% is so much little, and 55%, I mean, it's only, what, 2%? I mean, no, it's for every, you get half of 50%.
Right.
But you really have to get up to 70, 80% to, I would think, to appreciate and make a difference.
Right. That's why I think, as we walk through these findings are encouraging, because even though the bump in dollars isn't great, we are seeing these effects, these positive effects.
Yeah. If the
Two quick questions. Was this year 2 of LCFF?
Yes, there's a very good question. So this, assignment variable is measured at the first year of the LCFF, fiscal year 2013 to 13, and we measure this outcome variable at the spring of the 2015. We got this measure in the census day of the 2015, October of 2015, but test score is generated from the spring of 2015. So there's a time gap of a year and a half, right? So we can see that there might be enough time to concentration grant have an effect on students.
John, I should also say that when we statistically test this won't be on the quiz, but when we statistically test this, we use all information from all the districts. But we weight the information from the districts that are really close to
Yeah.
this disruption here. So it's not that we have information from districts that are getting a lot more concentration grant money, but these districts are so different that we downweight those, so to speak, and we upweight the districts that are closer to the experimental shock.
Do you do a similar thing on, like, say, 2011 test scores to see where the starting point, a base that predates the distribution?
Yeah, we could do that prior to LCFF.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good question. Any more question on this plot? Then let me move on to other results. So we asked the question about the school organization features. Do districts that receive the concentration grant offer a greater percentage of the courses that meet A to G course guidelines? So it shows that there is a jump, right? If there is no effect of this cut point having a concentration grant, it should be very smooth. It should be connected. But we see some discrete jump here, so it suggests that the treatment group, maybe mainly this school district, has more percentage of the courses meeting A to Z requirement than this school district, just right below the cut point. So this is some technical point of the regression discontinuity. The first one of the technical point is that we're actually weighting, as Bruce said, we're weighting more for the school district around the cut point. So if we graph the weight for that, it looks like this, right? So we actually essentially excluding this school district, which is far from the cut point, because they are already too different from each other, right? This school district and this school district. So we weight more on in the school districts, just right below and right above the cut point. So, but limitation of this is that the regions can be only generalized to this school district. The school district with about 40 to 60% of the TSP student within that district. So that is that is why we call this average treatment effect as a local. It's not global treatment effect, but this is a local for this school district. Okay. And we also wanted to know whether this is just comes from some sample peculiarity. So we just summarize the statistical uncertainty here. And if this is a 95% of the confidence interval of our treatment effect estimate. So if this 95% of the confidence interval include the 0 red dashed line, it says that it's not statistically significant. That just comes from just sample peculiarity, idiosyncrasy, right? So it suggests that. So I also estimate the regression discontinuity estimate from the several methods. I set some different bandwidth selection or algorithm, or set some different functional form estimation, and it consistently suggests that it has a positive effect on the percentage of courses meeting A to G guidelines. And for the second question in the school organization feature was that are fewer class periods assigned to teachers on average in district that received concentration grant? And also you can see that there's a jump, right, here. But you might be curious that why we are getting this, a severely curved regression lines, because we are estimating some local linear regression, not global linear regression. So global linear regression will look like this, right? Just a linear, or just if we just set the some polynomial term, it look like this, a curve like this. But we just set the many regression line on the very local region in our x-axis. So that's why we have smooth curves for each of the regions.
And this difference here is one class period. You probably can't read this, but this is being assigned 5 classes during the day versus 6. So this drop here is teachers just past the 55% with concentration grants. Those teachers saw some relief in terms of their class workload.
Yeah.
One class per day.
Yep.
Yep. Yeah.
On all these graphs, you seem to see, and correct me if I'm wrong, improvement in those school districts that are just over the cut line.
Yeah.
By the measures that you've chosen. But it also appears in this graph and others that as you get into schools with higher concentrations of the targeted students, their performance by those standards gets worse. Now, am I wrong there?
So, yeah, it's true. But you mean the overall trend of this regression line, right?
Well, you look over to the right where you have very
You
high
mean here?
concentrations.
Oh, yeah.
Then you also have very high class loads.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that the of the grants seems to be apparent just over the cut line, but doesn't follow through as you get further and further away from that cut line up to the higher concentrations. Then the measures that you've chosen seem to deteriorate rather than get.
Yeah, it's a little hard to interpret, Dan, because like here we still see an improvement. But I think it's fair to say that the biggest bang is right closest to this cut point. And then these districts further out here are more disadvantaged, maybe.
And wouldn't those districts with extremely high numbers of disadvantaged students need the benefits of the additional funding? And they're getting more funding because they have more of those students, and they would seem to need more of that. But is it actually showing up in the results?
That's a good point.
It's true.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
How much is that attributed to the fact that there's teacher retention as well as the number of teachers graduating or pursuing credential programs?
Yeah,
Program related.
that is a very good question. So this kind of a causal estimation is some kind of black box model. We have a treatment variable and we have outcome variable. We just want to identify, isolate the effect of the concentration gradient on the outcome. So we don't know what's going on inside the black box. But some kind of other, regression discontinuity estimate from other estimate would suggest some kind of mechanism on that. For example, we also had a regression discontinuity estimate on the number of new teachers for school district, each of the school district. And it suggests that, number of, the concentric, providing a district with a concentration grant lead to, increase of, number of the new teacher. But this might be the, result of, getting a new teachers, like, long substitute or temporary employee, like that. So, but we don't know sure. We are not sure about that exact mechanism why we are getting this.
Just to talk about the previous question.
Mm-hmm.
I think because on the right side, there's no comparison group. Because every school there get funding, get grants. And only the cut points that you have a comparison group. The group that did not get grants. So we cannot say that the grants did not help those schools on the right, because if they didn't get a grant, they may get worse. So that part is because we don't have a comparison group.
Yeah, we can say that we are not sure for this group.
Yeah.
But we don't say that these groups have a negative effect or some kind of effect. We cannot sure about that because we don't have any comparison group. So
you showed us that there's this drop in the number of failures in the ELA. I'm wondering, is what you're trying to do here look at different things, like is it reduced class size, or sorry, fewer teachers, more teachers? What's causing that? Is that part of what you're trying to talk about here?
Yeah, I think our logic, you're going to see some positive effects on achievement.
Yeah.
And we are trying to back up and say, well, can we detect organizational changes that would be proximal to gains in achievement? Yeah, but as the previous question suggested, we can't get much beneath the organizational mechanisms for which districts are reporting data on, which is sometimes frustrating.
Is it possible that you're seeing this big shift over the concentration grant line because it is easier to target your funding to your kids that generated the funding when there's fewer of them? Like when you have 95% of your kids are unduplicated count kids, and it's sort of easy to say, well, we're just going to spend the money on everybody the same. It's sort of easier.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think we need to look at who are these districts here? And we've spent a little bit of time in Culver City, for example. I think they have 9 schools. So I'm not sure they get concentration, but for supplemental, they know which 3 schools they should. So it's a really good point. We need to know more about those schools that are just beyond the cut point, districts that are just beyond the cut point.
Probably for the outcome, if you look from a year-to-year growth, and that may explain, better.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
Because the baseline for the not funding schools, not grant schools, and granted schools, they're different. But when you see the growth, it should be, it should show the effects of the funding.
Yeah.
I'm going to suggest we finish up here, and then we
Yeah,
can open it
yeah.
up, just so you see
Okay.
the other effects that we're finding, and then
Yeah.
we should have 10 minutes left. Does that make sense?
Okay. I think there is a very great insight, and that is called the difference in difference regression discontinuity design. Let me get back to you, after I finish the, presenting all the results here. So let's turn to the indicators of student achievement. So we asked, do larger shares of students who score 3 or above on advanced placement exam in district receiving concentration grant? We also found a discrete jump when school district receiving concentration grant, the shares of students receiving 3 or higher in AP exam also increases significantly, as you can see here. And then this is a more exciting result for us. So the y-axis here is a percentage of the graders fail to meeting the standards in ELA, Smarter Balanced Assessment. So this is a the plot we've reviewed before, and we found that when school district receiving the concentration grant, the percentage of the low-performing student is actually decreasing significantly. And for the high-performing student, this is a percentage of the 3 to 8 graders scored, exceeded standard in Smarter Balanced Assessment, and the circular trend is reversed here, right? The percentage of the low-performing students goes up as percentage of TSP students goes up, but for this percentage of high-performing students is decreasing as a percentage of the TSP students increases. So here we see that there's some discrete jump in the cut point, which suggests if when school districts getting concentration grant, percentage of the high-performing students is actually increasing, right? So.
Did I hear you say the slide before that the percentage of low-perform students who are failing the ELA are higher when districts receive the concentration grants? The slide before this one, I was trying to get it.
No, lower. The share failing to meet it's a double negative. The share failing to meet standard is lower when they get concentration, which is consistent with how the higher achievers are doing too. We're just trying to see whether these effects are local to low achievers or the high achievers. It seems like we can detect effects of both across the spectrum of achievement.
Yeah. Thank you. And so we are not showing only significant in a plot. So many of the plot we are getting is that actually connected plot across the cutoff. But we are just presenting significant effects. So you might see this is just common for all the situation, but it's not. We got very exciting news from our data analysis. So for the now let's turn to the math exam. So this is a low percent of the low performing student at math for grades 3 through 8 in the Smarter Balanced Assessment. It also suggests that the concentration grant has an effect on decreasing the percentage of the low performing student in math, right? As well as English language art. But for some reason, this suggests that some positive effect of the concentration grant on the percentage of high performing student in math. But even though there is some discrete jump here in the cut point, but we found no significant effect. This suggests that some positive effect of concentration grant, but we are not sure. This might be just some sampling idiosyncrasy, I think. So
just we're going to open it up for comments and questions in a second, but just to summarize here, we're sort of presenting two different analytic strategies, right? We're sort of first saying, well, how are the dollars distributed across schools within a district? Do the dollars get to the schools serving the intended TSP population? In the case of LA, we see some good news for high schools and very little progressivity with regard to spreading the new dollars to elementary schools. We want to know a little bit more about the institutional processes. How does this break down? The LA School Board passes a resolution 2 years ago committing themselves to progressively distributing dollars to high-need schools, but they follow it only for high schools to a limited extent. They ignore their own legislation at the elementary level. And then this issue of whether the structure of budgets is shifting as we pump more money. Are we moving away from allocations to certified teachers? Is it easier to hire support personnel? What's going on? And for those fine-grained distributional questions, we focus on LA. And then, as Joonho's just walked through with you for the statewide results, now looking at variation across districts as opposed to schools, We see some organizational effects that are encouraging, that is access to more challenging courses. Maybe CGs are improving working conditions in terms of fewer courses being assigned each day to classroom teachers. And then perhaps those organizational features are driving some of these positive student achievement effects. As some of your questions have suggested, we're still in kind of hazy territory here. We'd like to associate these organizational changes with the achievement benefits, but that's kind of where we are at the frontier now, trying to relate these two sets of findings between organizations and student achievement results. And finally, we're just starting to look at this for charter schools, because we can run the same analyses for charters to see whether charter schools that receive concentration grants are actually showing the same kinds of benefits. So we've got a lot more to do, but we thought we would at least share with you these two different analytic strategies and kind of the potential for both strategies and really pinpointing where there are effects and benefits from LCFF over time.